The cold linoleum of the bathroom floor pressed against her bare knees, each tile a tiny, icy shock. Maribel stared at the two pink lines on the plastic stick, her breath catching in her throat like a bird trapped in a cage. Her stomach churned, a violent tempest mirroring the chaos in her mind. It couldn't be true, not after everything, not this. A single, silent tear traced a path down her cheek, a hot river through the frozen landscape of her fear. She clutched the test, crushing it slightly in her trembling hand. Footsteps thudded heavily from the hallway, each one a hammer blow against her fragile calm. It was Jareth, her older brother. His presence always brought a chill, a suffocating darkness that clung to the corners of their small, worn-out house. Maribel scrambled to hide the test, shoving it deep into the pocket of her oversized hoodie, her heart hammering against her ribs. She splashed water on her face, trying to erase the panic, to rearrange her expression into something resembling normalcy. The bathroom door creaked open. Jareth leaned against the frame, his eyes, usually cold and unreadable, now held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher, a possessive gleam that made her skin crawl. He watched her, a predator observing its prey, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his lips. "What's got you looking so pale, Maribel?" he purred, his voice a low, menacing rumble that always promised trouble. He stepped further into the room, blocking her escape. She mumbled something about not feeling well, her voice barely a whisper. Her gaze darted past him, desperate for an exit, for any shred of light in the suffocating gloom he brought. But there was nowhere to go. He advanced, closing the distance between them, and the familiar scent of stale cigarettes and something else, something cloying and sickly sweet, filled the small room. Maribel instinctively recoiled, her entire body tensing, bracing for the inevitable. Suddenly, the front door downstairs slammed open with an explosive force that rattled the very foundations of the house. Lowell, her father, was home. His arrival was usually marked by the deafening roar of his beat-up pickup truck, but today, an eerie silence had preceded this violent entrance. Jareth froze, his cruel smile faltering, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Maribel's heart leaped with a desperate, fleeting hope. The heavy thud of Lowell's work boots echoed on the stairs, growing louder, more urgent. Maribel could almost feel the tremor in the floorboards. She knew that sound. It wasn't the usual drunken stagger. This was a man on a mission, fueled by a different kind of rage. Lowell appeared at the bathroom door, his face a mask of thunderous fury, his eyes blazing. In his hand, he gripped something tightly, something small and white and unmistakable. It was an identical pregnancy test, clearly retrieved from the trash. His gaze, usually reserved for punishing silence, landed on Maribel, burning with an intensity she had never witnessed. "You little tramp," he roared, his voice shaking the entire house. He lunged forward, the test held aloft like a damning piece of evidence, and the world spun into a dizzying kaleidoscope of pain and terror. The first blow landed hard across her face, sending her stumbling backward, her head hitting the cold tile wall with a sickening thud. Just before darkness claimed her, she saw Jareth standing motionless, his face expressionless, watching his sister fall. Maribel woke to the smell of antiseptic and the dull, throbbing ache in her cheek. The world swam back into focus in shades of gray. She was on her cot, the thin blanket pulled up to her chin. Her mother, Naoma, sat on a small wooden stool beside her, wiping a damp cloth on Maribel's split lip. Naoma's hands trembled, and she wouldn't meet her daughter's eyes. Silent tears streamed down her mother's face, falling onto the very wound she was trying to clean. Lowell was gone. The rumble of his truck had faded hours ago, likely to a bar where he would drink away the rage. But Jareth was still in the house. She could feel his presence, a cancer in the walls. This wasn't new, only worse. The rot had set in years ago, in this isolated holler in rural West Virginia, where everyone knew your name but no one knew your secrets. Lowell had always favored his son, seeing in Jareth a reflection of his own harshness. Maribel remembered being small, when Jareth's protection felt safe. He'd chase off bullies. He'd sneak her extra biscuits from dinner. But as she grew, the protection soured into possession. The locks he'd put on her window were to keep you safe, but they only locked her in. The way he looked at her changed. The first time he crossed the line, she was 13. She had cried, and he had simply told her, "This is our secret. If you tell, Dad will blame you." And she knew he was right. Now, the secret had a heartbeat. Naoma finally spoke, her voice a cracked whisper. "He broke my good bull." Maribel stared, confused. Her mother wasn't talking about the beating, or the baby. "He threw it at the wall after he left," Naoma clarified, still not looking at her. She was a woman so broken she could only mourn the material, not the spiritual. Maribel's heart didn't just break, it turned to dust. She was truly, completely alone. Suddenly, the floorboards outside her room creaked. Naoma flinched, rising from the stool like a startled deer. The mother scurried out of the room, abandoning her post. The door opened, and Jareth filled the frame. He had a glass of water in one hand. He looked at her bruised face, then at her stomach, and a slow, proprietary smile crept onto his face. He set the water on the nightstand. "Dad's gone for the night," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Now we have to talk about our problem." The problem, Maribel learned, was not what she thought. Jareth wasn't angry about the baby. He was possessive of it. "You're not getting rid of it," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. He sat on the edge of her cot, his weight making the mattress sag toward him. Maribel pressed herself against the cold, particle-board wall, trying to create a distance that didn't exist. "It's mine. It's ours." His control became absolute. He was her jailer. He would bring her food, but he would watch her eat it. He confiscated the old flip phone Naoma had given her. Lowell, when he was home, treated Maribel like she was invisible. He'd walk past her as if she were a piece of furniture, his silence a heavy, suffocating blanket. The only time he spoke to her was to bark, "You're not to leave this house. You've shamed us enough." The house, once a home, was now a prison run by two different wardens. The morning sickness was brutal. The smell of Lowell's cigarettes or Jareth's coffee made her retch. Naoma would sometimes try to sneak her ginger tea or dry crackers, but Jareth always found out. He intercepted the small kindnesses, accusing their mother of trying to poison his baby. He would dump the tea in the sink, his eyes fixed on Maribel, a silent warning. He was cutting her off from everyone, even the ghost of her mother. As weeks turned into a month, her body began to betray her. The slight swell of her stomach was undeniable. Jareth seemed proud. He started spreading a new story in town, a lie to cover his tracks and cement her ruin. Maribel learned of it when Lowell stormed in one night, drunker than usual, his face a terrifying shade of purple. He was holding his shotgun. "I heard a rumor at the general store," he slurred, leveling the gun not at her, but at the wall above her head. "About you and that boy from the diner. Oswin." Oswin was a kind, lanky boy with glasses who worked at the town's only diner. He had given Maribel a free slice of pie once. That was the extent of their affair. Jareth had woven this lie with masterful cruelty, painting Maribel as a tramp and himself as the betrayed, protective brother. Lowell, blinded by his own rage and his son's manipulations, believed every word. He grabbed Maribel by the hair, dragging her out of the house and shoving her into his truck. The ride to the diner was a blur of terror. He pushed her through the diner doors, the little bell announcing their arrival with sickening cheer. Lowell roared her supposed sins to the handful of evening patrons. "This one. She's been sneaking around with your boy," he shouted at Oswin's boss. Oswin himself was behind the counter, pale and shaking. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Lowell. I swear." His denial only enraged Lowell further. Humiliated that his authority was questioned, Lowell dragged Maribel back home. The beating was methodical, a punishment for the shame she had brought him in public. He used his belt. Naoma tried to step between them, pleading, "Lowell, stop, you'll kill her." He shoved his wife with such force that she fell against the wood stove, her arm striking the iron with a sickening crack. Naoma cried out, clutching a wrist that was clearly broken. Lowell, finally spent, threw Maribel into the damp, cold cellar and bolted the door. "You'll stay there and think about what you did," he spat. Maribel lay on the hard-packed dirt floor, her body a symphony of pain. The cold seeped into her bones. Hours passed in the suffocating darkness. She felt a new, sharp cramp, a terrifying wetness. She looked down in the sliver of light from under the door. She was bleeding. The baby. She was losing the baby. The bleeding was a false alarm, a warning from a body pushed to its limit. Jareth, panicked at the thought of losing his property, brought her back upstairs. He berated Lowell for being reckless, solidifying his role as the baby's protector. He confined Maribel to her room, and the house settled into a new, tense silence. Naoma's arm was set in a crooked, homemade splint. She was more silent than ever, a gray ghost haunting the hallways. Maribel was now 6 months pregnant. Her world had shrunk to the 4 walls of her room. But Jareth had missed something. Months ago, Maribel had found a small, prepaid phone, bought with babysitting money and hidden under a loose floorboard. It was her only link to the outside world. She had no one to call, until she remembered a leaflet she'd seen tacked to the clinic's bulletin board. "Are you safe at home? There is help." She had memorized the number. One night, when Lowell was passed out and Jareth was in the shed, she powered it on. The signal was weak, one flickering bar. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. She waited, her heart pounding in her ears. It rang once. Twice. A voice answered, calm and strong. "Appalachian Women's Shelter, this is Calla speaking. Are you in a safe place to talk?" Maribel's throat closed. She could only whimper. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He locks me in. My father, my brother. I'm pregnant and..." She poured out the story in a frantic, hushed torrent. Calla listened, her voice never changing, a solid rock in Maribel's ocean of panic. "We can get you, Maribel," Calla said. "We have an extraction point. The old bus stop on Route 12, 3 miles east of your hollow. Can you be there tomorrow at 5 a.m.? "Yes," Maribel breathed. "I'll be there." Just as she said it, a shadow fell under her door. The handle turned with a violent, metallic rattle. It was Jareth. But he hadn't heard. He was just checking on her, a zookeeper checking his prize. He rattled the knob, found it locked from the inside, a flimsy chair she had wedged under it, and grunted. "Open this door, Maribel." She quickly ended the call, hiding the phone as he shouldered the door open, breaking the chair. He scanned the room, his eyes suspicious, but he saw nothing. He left, locking it from the outside with a new padlock. Maribel's hope crumbled. He had locked her in. But Calla's voice remained in her head. She looked at her window. It was a 12-foot drop, but it landed on a soft patch of dirt near Naoma's dying garden. It was the only way. She spent the night tearing her bedsheet into strips, her hands shaking but her mind clear. She packed nothing. She couldn't. She would leave with only her life and the one growing inside her. At 4 a.m., she tied the sheet rope to her metal cot. She eased herself out the window, the cold air biting her skin. Her pregnant body made the descent clumsy. She landed hard, jarring her teeth, but she was out. She ran, half walking, half shuffling through the woods, avoiding the road. 3 miles. It felt like 100. Every snapped twig sounded like Jareth's footsteps. Every hoot of an owl was Lowell's roar. She finally reached the bus stop, a rusted sign on a gravel patch, just as the sky began to turn a faint, bruised purple. 5 a.m. She waited. 5:10, her body ached. 5:15, she was exposed. Fear began to eat at her hope. A vehicle was coming. Headlights appeared, cutting through the pre-dawn mist. It wasn't a shelter van. It was the familiar, rusted silhouette of Lowell's pickup truck. Jareth got out of the driver's side, his face unreadable in the glare. "You really thought you could leave me?" The drive back was silent, a suffocating, terrible quiet. Jareth didn't touch her. He didn't have to. His victory was total. He dragged her back inside and threw her into her room. This time, he nailed the window shut. The last sliver of the outside world was gone. The house became a tomb. Months passed. The pregnancy advanced, a constant, heavy reminder of her captivity. Maribel stopped speaking. She was a shell, her only focus the small, fluttering life inside her. The labor came violently, in the middle of a thunderstorm. It was too fast, too soon. She screamed. Lowell, drunk, yelled from his room to shut her up. Naoma, her hand now healed into a permanent, crooked claw, was the only one who came. She was terrified, but the primal instinct of a mother, however buried, took over. Jareth stood in the doorway, watching, his presence a dark, suffocating force. It was a fast, brutal birth on the dirty floor. Maribel was ripped and bleeding, but the baby was alive. A boy. He let out a strong, healthy wail. Naoma, weeping, cut the cord with kitchen shears. She tried to hand the baby to Maribel, but Jareth stepped forward. "I'll take him," he said. He scooped up the newborn, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying, triumphant pride. "He's mine. He looks just like me." Maribel, weak and dizzy from blood loss, reached for him. "No, please, give me my baby." Jareth just smiled. "You need to rest, Maribel. I'll take care of him." He walked out of the room, taking her son with him. Maribel tried to follow, to crawl, but her body gave out. She heard the click of the padlock on her door. He had locked her in, and he had her son. Maribel was a prisoner, separated from her child. She could hear him crying from Jareth's room down the hall. It was a thin, desperate wail. Jareth was inept. She heard him yelling at the baby to shut up. She heard Lowell yelling at Jareth to control that thing. The sound of her son's distress, a sound she was powerless to soothe, was a new kind of torture. It pushed her past fear, past despair, into a cold, hard rage. But it wasn't just Maribel who was breaking. It was Naoma. Decades of silent endurance had hollowed her out, but the sound of her grandson's cries, and her daughter's frantic pounding on the locked door, finally ignited something. She watched Jareth try to feed the baby, fumbling with a bottle, his anger rising. This was the moment. The miracle was not a voice on the phone or a stranger at the door. It was the snapping of a chain. Naoma walked into the kitchen. Lowell was at the table, a bottle of whiskey in hand. "Make that thing stop crying," he slurred. Naoma said nothing. She picked up the heavy, cast-iron skillet from the stove. "I said." Lowell began, turning. Naoma swung the skillet with all the strength of her broken, healed arm. The sound of iron hitting bone was dull and final. Lowell slumped to the floor, unconscious. Jareth, hearing the thud, came out of his room, the crying baby in his arms. He saw his father on the floor. He saw his mother, skillet in hand, her face a mask of terrible calm. "What did you do?" he whispered. Naoma advanced on him. "You will not destroy him," she said, her voice new and cold, a stranger's voice. "Give me my grandson." For the first time in his life, Jareth looked at his mother and saw not a victim, but a threat. He sneered, his arrogance returning. "You crazy old." He lunged at her, trying to grab the skillet. But Naoma was faster. She screamed, not in fear, but in pure, animalistic rage. Maribel! Hearing her mother's cry, Maribel threw her entire body against her locked door. The cheap wood splintered. She burst out, weak, bleeding, but fueled by adrenaline. She saw the scene, Lowell on the floor, Jareth fighting Naoma, and her tiny son, wrapped in a dirty towel, screaming in the middle of the chaos. Jareth had dropped the baby on the sofa to attack Naoma. Maribel didn't hesitate. She grabbed the skillet from her mother's hand. "Get away from her," she commanded, her voice a raw growl. She scooped up her son with her other arm, holding him tight. It was a standoff. Jareth, Naoma, and Maribel. The family, finally unmasked. Jareth, seeing both women united, backed away, his eyes wild. "You're both dead," he hissed. "When he wakes up, you're dead." "He won't," Maribel said, holding the skillet high. She was ready to use it. Jareth looked from the skillet to his father's body, calculating. He took a step toward the phone on the wall. "I'll tell them you killed him. I'll tell them you're crazy." Just as his fingers touched the receiver, the porch was flooded with blinding blue and red lights. A car door slammed. Someone was pounding on the front door. "This is the sheriff's department. Open the door." Calla. Calla never gave up. She had called in a wellness check. The police burst in. The scene was a prosecutor's dream, Lowell unconscious on the floor, Naoma battered, Jareth cornered, and Maribel, pale and bleeding, clutching a newborn baby and a cast-iron skillet. Jareth immediately started screaming. "She did it! She's crazy! She attacked our father!" But Calla was right behind the deputies. She walked in, her eyes finding Maribel. "That's her," Calla said. "That's the woman who called." The police separated them. While medics tended to Lowell, Calla gently took the baby from Maribel's arms. "What's his name?" she whispered. Maribel looked at her son, really looked at him for the first time. "Orion," she said, naming him after the stars she used to watch from her window. Calla wrapped Orion in a clean blanket from her go-bag. The lies fell apart. Jareth was arrested. Lowell, upon waking, was also arrested. The House of Secrets was finally empty. Naoma, facing charges for the assault, sat at the kitchen table and, for the first time in 30 years, told the truth. She told them everything. Her testimony, combined with Maribel's, painted a picture of horror that shocked even the seasoned deputies. Maribel and Orion were taken to Calla's shelter. The ending wasn't a fairy tale, it was a beginning. It was a long road of therapy, court dates, and learning to live without fear. Naoma's testimony against her husband and son, an act of final, redemptive courage, earned her probation. Jareth was sentenced to a long time in prison. Lowell, for his complicity and abuse, was also incarcerated. The final scene is 1 year later. Maribel is in a small, bright apartment in a new town. She is rocking Orion, who is babbling and healthy. On the table is a community college textbook. She looks out the window, not at the dark, suffocating trees of the holler, but at a busy street full of life. She is scarred. She is healing. But she is, finally, free. Please like, share and comment.